The sound type is probably the most popular fan-made type that people want to add into the world of Pokemon, but I don't think that it's a very good idea. I see a lot of videos and theory modding about how this type could be implemented, but this is kind of a counter to this. I want to talk about why the sound type wouldn't work, in my opinion. If you disagree with that, please let me know. As part of this, I've come up with 3 reasons why I don't think sound type would work, and 1 reason why I think it might work quite well. I wanted to keep this a pretty balanced argument, but we'll start with the disadvantages. The first real disadvantage I see with the sound type is that it doesn't really lend itself to being a very diverse type. What I mean by this is that I can only really think of special or status moves that the sound type could have. Game Freak are amazing at coming up with new move ideas, but I think that they would really struggle with trying to create physical sound type moves that really apply to a lot of different Pokemon. Out of all of these sound moves already, there's actually not any of them that are physical moves. However, I'd probably say that you could probably put drum beating within that category. To me, that's the only real sound type physical move that would really work, even though, like I said, drum beating isn't actually a sound based move. If you're looking at signature moves for other Pokemon, you could probably add one in for Kricketune, something to do with its bow that could maybe help and maybe be a signature move, but then again, that wouldn't apply to a lot of sound types, and it wouldn't be very good coverage from many of the Pokemon because I can't really think of any other Pokemon that would get this move. So with this, I'd say you're basically limited to a move that maybe resembles vibrations, but I don't think that this would be very widely applicable because not every sound-based Pokemon is vibration related. In fact, very few of them are, even though you can probably apply it to them with a bit of creative license. This niche of kind of vibration moves is kind of already exists with ground types. You know, they have Bulldoze, Magnitude, and Earthquake, which are all vibration-based moves. Now, not having a lot of move variety isn't that bad for a type. Look at Fighting and Fairy. So the only real good and reliable special move in the Fighting arsenal is Vacuum Wave, because Aura Sphere isn't really the most powerful of moves, and you'd obviously be better off buying lottery tickets than using Focus Blast. This doesn't include moves like Secret Sword, which is not very widely applicable to all fighting type Pokemon. Fairy has it even worse, with basically Play Rough being your only option, and this again isn't the most reliable moves, especially when Fairy has one of the best, most spammable moves in Moonblast. So that's essentially point 1, is that a sound type would be really, really special focused, and it would really struggle for physical attackers like Rillaboom. Speaking of Rillaboom, I mentioned before that drum beating isn't actually a sound type move in the game. And what I mean by this is the category of sound moves, which I think is a perfect way to implement sound in Pokemon, which is what Pokemon is already doing. So in Pokemon, as well as moves having types, there are also like categories of moves, so punching moves, slashing moves, wind-based moves, and sound is one of these categories. It has a few features like Throat Spray or Soundproof or Punk Rock, which are all based around this idea of you can have a sound category of moves. I think that this method of implementing sound works perfectly because it essentially allows for moves to be 2 types. In reality, we only really have one move which is 2 types, and that is Hawlucha's signature move, Flying Press. On a side note, Game Freak introduced this way back in Generation 6, and they haven't done anything like it since, which I think is a really big missed opportunity. If you remove sound as a category and instead have it as a type, you get into an area where a lot of moves that really could fit into both types would probably have to pick between 2 of them. So take for example Bug Buzz, which is a bug type move but is also sound based. This would get into a situation where do you put this as a bug move or do you put this as a sound based move? It fits into both, but I think that it would really lose some of that flavor that you get from it being a bug move, but it's also a sound move. The same can be said with moves like Sparkling Aria, Torch Song, or Overdrive. They really fit into both categories, but I think that they would lose a lot of the fun if you just made them all sound moves. You'd also have the fact that they would all be competing with each other now, instead of being different moves which do different things. Obviously, I do know that these moves are slightly different in how they work, but now they're all sound special moves rather than being good coverage moves or main stab on a Pokemon. Put it this way, imagine if instead of having moves like Thunder Punch or Ice Punch being their respective types, what if we just made them all fighting type? We'd lose a lot of coverage options, and even though they do function differently, we would lose a lot of the flavor that comes from these moves, but also they would be competing with each other. There's also the matter that a lot of these moves are signature moves. Torch Song, Sparkling Aria, they're all moves that are specific or very, very limited to certain types of Pokemon. And this would mean that you would have very few options for actual sound stab. Obviously, the way to counter this is that most sound types would probably get Hyper Voice. However, Hyper Voice is also the most reliable and most widely distributed of the normal special moves, because very few Pokemon get Tri-Attack, and Hyper Beam isn't that good. In changing this from a normal to a sound move, I think that a lot of normal special attackers would get really, really bad. The final reason why I think that sound is a bad type is that I don't think that there are enough Pokemon for it. By my count, there's about 22 Pokemon lines who I think could feasibly be sound, but I don't think that all of them should be. 12 of these are Pokemons where I think that you could just stick on sound or replace a type. A lot of these are normal types. Exploud, Audino, Chatot, Meloetta, Wigglytuff, and Squawkabilly. I think that you could all replace their normal types with a sound type, and then I'd add sound onto Chimecho, Kricketune, Maractus, Mismagius, and Rillaboom, making all of these into a dual type. The next group of Pokemon I think could fit into a sound type, but the issue is that they're already dual types, and it would get into a scenario where you kind of have to get rid of one of their types, which most of their types fit pretty well. So I think that this would cause some issues. To take Noivern, for example, who's a flying dragon type, you'd have to get rid of one of those types for Noivern and replace it with sound, even though all three of those types really fit. So in this group, I'd include Pokemon like Swoobat, Noivern, as I mentioned before, Ludicolo, Toxtricity, Altaria, Komodo, Seismitoad, Primarina, Skeledirge, and Bronzong. All of these are dual types, who I think already have very fitting dual types, so adding in the sound type would mean that you'd have to make it a little bit awkward. In some cases, like Altaria, who really already fits into 3 types with fairy types, this would be even more of a challenge, because how do you include that sound type in even when it mega evolves? You'd have to get rid of one of the types that it keeps when it mega evolves. I think it keeps dragons, so you'd probably have to get rid of it being a dragon type already. It would just be a whole rigmarole. So I'm being really negative at the moment, but I do think that sound would work well for one reason, and this is as a balancing tool. So in Pokemon, some types are strong and some types are really weak, and sound I think would really shake up the current status quo that they're in. So for things that I think that sound would be good at, I would include water, ground, and steel types. And this is because, if you don't know, sound waves travel through air at a much slower rate than they do through liquids or solids. So these are the kind of materials that sound travels very well through. So water obviously represents liquids, while ground and steel would represent the solids. And I haven't included rock here just because rock's a pretty bad type already, so I didn't want to weaken it anymore. Water type is definitely a top 5 type. It's one of the best types, one of the most spammable types, so giving that something that resists it would really help with metagames. As well as this ground, everybody knows how good Earthquake is. It's one of the most consistent attacking types, almost entirely just because Earthquake is one of the best moves in the world of Pokemon. And Steel because Steel's a really strong type. It's by far the best defensive type, so giving Steel another weakness would always be helpful. As for types that Sound could struggle against, well, I've gone with Ice and Grass. Ice here more represents Snow, because Snow is a really good insulator of sound. You probably don't realize it, but when it snows, it's actually really quiet, and that's because essentially the soft, cushiony snow is a dampener for sound. The same can be applied for wood, which is why forests are normally quite eerily quiet. You could probably also put some resistances on electricity, you know, light is faster than sound, so you could maybe bring into that. And maybe also bug, you could give a resistance to. A lot of sound theory types that I've seen put bug as being immune to sound because bugs don't have ears, but this is wrong. It's just not all bugs have ears. Most of the bugs that you think of as being bugs do have ears. They can hear. Most of them communicate through vibrations, and crickets make that noise to talk to other crickets, basically. That's why I didn't give them a full-blown immunity. So I don't think that it's all a bad case for sound, but I definitely feel as though it isn't enough to make it a type that could really be considered, just because so much would have to change and you'd have to bring in so many new moves, and a lot of the Pokemon that we already have are questionable whether they could become sound types, so you'd have to introduce a lot of new sound types to make it a type that really feels fleshed out. That said, however, if you disagree, if you're in the I Love Sound type club, please let me know down below, because I need the engagement. And if you've enjoyed this video, I hope that I've earned a like or a subscribe, and thank you.